sword, or are they walking a fine line between, understanding that they do have gold, but could this, is there a chance that they lose tradition in interviewing them and being with them, or do you feel like they're so rooted in what they're doing that it'll be okay?
Well, I think that when you talk about tradition, Gustav Mahler said that tradition is not the worship of the ashes, but carrying the flame. And that, I think, is what is happening with wine and agriculture, that you can keep this alive, keep going. And, I don't think tradition should be a static, it's not a static thing, so I think it goes on. And what's so fascinating about wine is it's really a multi-generational project. It's not like a startup, you get a bunch of guys in a room, or guys and ladies, with computers, and, coding, and you can make something happen.
Every decision is 10 years down the line.
Yeah.
Or further.
Yeah, every decision you make. And I think that there were possibly some mistakes that were made when there was more planting of international varietals, throwing out some of these old varieties. But I think the uniqueness of Italy, and especially the South, is that it resisted a kind of consolidation. So things stayed pretty rustic. And to give you an example, like the average size of an Italian vineyard is like 5 acres. In France, it's 20. In California, it's 50. And so a lot of it is that confusion, which is Southern Italy. It's a mess. Administratively, people can't, it's confusing, it's a mess, you can't get people to agree on anything. But I think that was its saving grace in a way, because it also didn't allow people in one instance to make a lot of big stupid decisions at once, and it saved a lot of their heritage. But when you talk about globalization too, I think it's a golden moment now, because these people need to be able to sell their wine somewhere. And Italians drink locally often. And I'll give you one case in point. The wines from the old volcano of Volturi in Basilicata, or in the Lazio countryside, people in those regions aren't going to spend, even the equivalent of $15 on a bottle. So they have to find their market somewhere. And I guess it relates to the south of somewhere thing. I think of Damiano Cioli. He was a guy laboring in the hills of Lazio, which is right outside of Rome. And Rome, of course, is the first globalized power. And being the first globalized power, I think a lot of their attitude is, why should we have wine from here? We can get any wine we want. Because that's what the Roman army did. They planted vines in France and brought wine back from all points of their empire. So as a local person, he was like selling his wine in like the farmer's market for €5 a bottle. And if he had stayed in that farmer's market, he still would be doing that. But he went up north to Norway. He was making this Cesanese, and people didn't have this mindset that, oh, you're making Cesanese red wine, that should sell for, how many thousand lira, which is like $1. And so by leaving, he was able to have success, and now is a success at his home turf. And if you go to restaurants here, like Lupo, where you used to work, you can find his wines there. And so I think that's the period that we're at now with this new generation that's smart, well-traveled, and I think they not only know how to interpret their terroir in an intelligent way, but they know how to get it to the market.
And I know we've gotten wine nerdy all of a sudden, but not to, like, these stories, the people that are in this book, and I think that's extremely important because we have a bunch of wine people in the house too, but for other people to understand the cost of production of what it takes to put these wines out. Because a lot of us go on vacation, you're like, oh my God, I had the house wine at this trattoria in Rome, and it was €3. That's good, and it was fun, and you're gonna say it can cause you to get drunk or have a headache or sulfites or whatnot. But the people that are making great wine, and great wine's not expensive wine, but great wine could be in Italy on a wine list 25, €30. What they're doing is super hard, and for us, for all of us, we, through our pocketbooks, and when you read this book, you can feel the connection. You can make that decision to save Galliopo, to save Dolcetto, to save these varietals, that if we don't go out there and spend a little more money than we maybe used to have that beautiful thing, that these people are working so, if you've ever worked harvest, it hurts. Agriculture is hard labor, and it's amazing that someone would leave their job and pardon my memory, the person, I like to call them characters because they're more than just, they leap out of the page, and that's again what I love about your writing. Like when last night I was rereading a bunch of the notes that I've taken in the book, and just like you're transported there, and the way you connect. It doesn't feel like a nonfiction story about food, wine, and culture. It feels unreal. How would you describe the work that they put in? You've seen it. You've been there. You've been to all these properties over a time frame, seeing pruning to harvest. How hard is it, and what are they sacrificing?
Well, I think that you're right. It is very difficult work, and I think that sometimes that's something that we city people don't appreciate. You know, we're just like, well, you know, just spray some organic magic compound and everything will go well. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like writing about wine people, is because they're small business people, but who are dealing with a whole set of completely uncontrollable factors, you know, that are completely out of their control, and they're sometimes at the mercy of that. And, you know, you have to appreciate like right now, there are people who are, instead of just taking the grapes in now, just getting it in, getting it done, whatever, they're waiting for those last days of October sunlight that are gonna make their grapes just a little more complex, make the tannins a little smoother, and those are the hard decisions that you really have to make, and that I really admire these people for.
Because you only get one shot.
Yeah.
You only get one time a year to make this product.
Yeah, and I've grown grapes before, and I've made wine before, and I'm an absolutely terrible grower. I have no patience for that, and I just absolutely admire the people, you know, the people who do that and who see their vineyard as a living organism, because that's really where wine is made now, more and more. I think there was a period maybe 25 years ago where wine was thought of, you know, being made in the cellar, and I think now, I mean, everybody says it, that wine is made in the vineyard, but it's really, really true. And those are, you know, decisions that are made all year, and how you cut them, and how you the leaves you take off in summer, and every little decision affects everything with the plant and, ultimately the wine.
So one thing I recommend when you're reading the book, don't read it on an empty stomach, because you'll just be hungry all day long, and you'll like, specifically if you're like around the city, and you're just gonna pop into any number of Italian restaurants, you're like, oh, I'm gonna go to Obica down the street and get some burrata after you're reading about burrata. You'll be a little sad. I mean, the burrata's good, don't get me wrong, but when you read about the perfumes of the two types of burrata that are in a town next to each other, and this is what makes, again, for those of us who've been to Italy, we're all excited about this. You have two towns that are right next to each other, they fight about their tomatoes, they fight about their cheese, they fight about everything in a jovial, fun way, but there's pride about it. We're gonna do a little BuzzFeedy kind of thing. We talked about this earlier. So the book is splashed with foodstuffs that I crave all the time. What are the 5 foods in this book that were life-changing or revelatory, or you couldn't live without?
Well, one of the things I wanted to say in general about it, well, most traditional cuisines, not just Italian cuisine, but we're talking about Italian. And oftentimes when we talk about cuisine, we tend to think of it as this thing that's on MasterChef, where you can pick all the ingredients in the world, and you can make whatever you want. You can make mangoes and avocados and mix them up. But what I love about traditional cuisines and recipes, and if you look of how the food of the South was shaped, it was really shaped by a lack of meat. And how people dealt with that scarcity to create these things to not only sustain people, but to fill their souls. So, one of the dishes that I would go to, I think is one of the most incredible dishes that everybody's familiar with, is cacio and pepe. A dish with just 4 ingredients. Pasta, pecorino cheese, because it was a dish that came from the shepherds who were on their transhumanza. So pasta, cheese, black pepper, and pasta water. But it's the way they put the pasta water in there and mix it up. No butter, no olive oil, just pasta water. And it's the way they do that, I think is something that I think all of us who love Italy, that's what we love about it, this kind of way of doing things that can transform ordinary ingredients into something kind of transcendent and beautiful, that bellezza that fills all the Italian streets, and it's that way of doing something to create beauty. So some other favorite things, I do briefly mention like my grandmother's pasta genovese, which is, but if you look at it, I mean, they took all the cuts, that weren't very great cuts, traditionally, and just basically stewed the heck out of it with onions, to the point where, again, you have this alchemy and these aromas and these flavors. In the book, I learned about a dish called sardella, which comes from Calabria, and when the fishing moment is right, they collect these like neonate, you wouldn't even know what they were. They're like a kind of a gelatinous mass, but it's really baby sardines. To
It's
express
delicious.
Yeah.
It's
And
okay.
and they take those and they mix these together with these red peppers. It's just absolutely.
It's spicy fish butter.
Yeah. And there's so many other. Another dish, to me, one of the most sublime, heavenly things in the world is the Neapolitan pastiera. which is a, recipe that goes back. I mean, the legend is that it came from the mermaid Persephone, that she sang, and they gave her these, these eggs and ricotta and flour, and that, she made this cake. And, that is something that is really heavenly and transporting.
I mean, I think I think most of us are drawn to Italy through food first, and then we find wine, because I wasn't drinking wine when I was too young. I'm like I said, zero Italian heritage, but I got there as fast as I could. That's a common text where I'm from in Texas. It says, not born in Texas, but got there as soon as I could. I left and wanted to go to Italy instead.
Oh, I wanted to throw in one more dish. I don't know if they, pane cotto. Where people take, bread, because people would make this bread, you make your bread for the week. And then by the end of the week, it was getting kind of stale. So what could you do with it to alchemize this bread into something delicious? And, there's many recipes for this, but, to me, that's one of the most, to take stale bread and make something delicious out of it is phenomenal.
And today in New York, we pay a lot of money for that. I think the interesting trend that you talk about in the book is the evolution of the food of poverty that was Southern Italy, and now how it's become so in trend. And we talked about that, the inexpensive cuts of meat are now the expensive cuts of meat, and how everything's kind of flipped on its head. And I think that we've seen that in the wine world of Southern Italy as well. I mean, every quality has been pushed up and up through the hard work of these growers. We discussed the vita, the life of being Italian, and what it's like to be in these different villages, and why you wanted to come back to the South after 50 years to your village. What do you think Italy can teach us in the way they live in our now post-COVID-ish world?
Okay. Well, first, there was one, when we were talking about the new generation, there's one thing that I did want to mention also. Jeff had pointed this out, that on his travels, he's found, why is there so many women now running these farms? And you were saying this when we met the other day. Jeff said was there something in the water?
Well, I think a lot, if you look from anyone born late 70s, early 80s, it seemed like more estates had daughters than had sons. And I think of in Piedmont, I think in Tuscany. Of all the countries that I did with in wine world, I've seen specifically more women take charge of the estate than men. And I feel like qualitatively things have gotten better. There's more nuance in the wine. I don't know if that's just emoting certain things, but I stole that from a producer actually who actually said that in Piedmont. It was Enrico Scavino was like, I think there was something in the water because all they had were daughters. And you talk about a lot of Italians from World War II, post-World War II were like, they wanted a son, and they got daughters, oh, my daughters aren't gonna want to take over the wine room, but they all did. And I think Italy is better for it.
Yeah, I think it's been a positive influence, because one of the reasons is, say for example, in this movement to equality, I think women can be very precise, but also I think when you're trying to change something, or trying to help that tradition evolve, or going back to ways that were more hand-done and qualitative, sometimes the father-son, relationship can be more, contentious, and it's a lot harder for, the son might feel more pressure, to do things the way they were. I know a big thing throughout all of Italy was, with this quality renaissance of wine, is that these winemakers go through and they drop fruit on the ground. And for a lot of winemakers, there were some winemakers who were disowned by their families for doing that. Like, you don't take what God gives you and throw it on the ground, you know? How do you do that? How do you do that? And, you know, in these father-son cases, it can be very dramatic. And, you know, you do find cases where the daughter, you know, she can kind of work that. You know, it's okay, Papa. But getting back to Italy and what it can offer in the post-ish, COVID-ish world, I think that, you know, again, it's that the appreciation of beauty and enjoying life. And I think also there's an expression which, in this video you saw, she said at the end, but she said it in dialect, which I'm terrible at. But in Italian you say, più buio di mezzanotte non fare, which means it doesn't get darker than midnight. And that's the spirit of the South. I mean, they've had 2,000 years of pandemics. I mean, we're babies about it, you know, frankly, you know. 2,000 years of pandemics, I mean, and, you know, think about what that was like. You know, the Romans didn't know what to do. You know, they were the first globalized power, so they had the first pandemic. You know, so they blamed their gods, they changed their gods, they got a new one, they made more sacrifice. And, you know, so I think that that's the spirit of the South, that things don't get darker than midnight, no matter how bad things seem. You know, you can't have any, you can't have any blacker than the black of night. And another thing I would say, and Jeff and I talked about this too, is this idea, and what I love about being in Italy and living in Italy is this, life is the public square and the passeggiata. The fact that, because in this modern world, everybody's on their, you know, whatever it is, Twitter, Instagram, you know, getting upset at each other and doing all this stuff. But what's great about Italy is the idea that you go out in the public square, and I live in Verona, where, you know, everybody knows from Romeo and Juliet, which people think is a love story, but it's not. Romeo and Juliet is a story of hatred between two families. You know, if they didn't have those two families that hated each other, there would be no story. It would be, okay, there's a couple of kids, they love each other, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, so all these families, they go out walking on Sunday afternoon, and they all have to look at each other in the eye and say, buonasera, blah, 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 even if they hate their guts. But I think that that is I think that's a good thing, and I think it's important that we see each other and look in each other's eyes, and so for me, that's the most important lesson.
And if there's one thing to take away from tonight, it's the word passeggiata. If you haven't done it already, it'll save your life. It's not a New York walk. It's a very slow, get your gelato, and what it would be like, fuck you very much. I hate your guts. Smile. You know, but at the end of the day, the passeggiata, the public square, and I couldn't agree with you more, and I think once you start reading this book, many of you, I heard Italian speakers around here, people are already hook, line, and sinker into the culture, but for those that aren't or are, you know, Italian curious, this is what it's all about. That's, you know, for me, Palmento changed, and this just reiterated the fact. You know, I've been going through an evolution of what I want to do with my life, and this reiterated why it has become a focus, why I want these people in my life. And I can't thank you enough for these words that they leap out of the page, and you know, it's an honor to sit next to you and talk about it.
Thank you, Jeff. I just want to give you a big hug now.
I like hugs. You can do it.